Stop what you are doing. Put everything else down. What Saturn just delivered in Aries is not a transit you scroll past. It is not another forecast buried in a weekly roundup. What happened is a verdict, and verdicts are different from forecasts. A forecast tells you what might happen. A verdict tells you what has already been decided. The cosmic court has ruled, and the ruling it just delivered has not been heard since 1996. Think about what 1996 means. That is not last year. That is not a recent memory for most of the people listening to this. 1996 is almost 30 years ago. The world that existed the last time Saturn delivered this verdict from Aries was a fundamentally different world. The internet was barely public. The phone in your pocket did not exist. The geopolitical map looked different. The cultural conversation was different. The economy was different. And the version of yourself that was alive in 1996 was either very young, not yet born, or living a life that is almost unrecognizable compared to the one you are living now. That is the scale of what just happened. Saturn in Aries has delivered a verdict that comes once in approximately 30 years, and it is addressed to you specifically, not to the collective in the abstract, to the specific life you are living, the specific structures you have built, the specific version of yourself you have been presenting to the world, and the specific things you have been telling yourself are true when they are not. In the next few minutes, you will understand 3 things about this Saturn verdict that will change how you see every decision you are currently facing. First, what a verdict from Saturn actually means and why this one is different from a simple planetary transit. Second, what Saturn in Aries is specifically judging and why the verdict it delivers now will determine the architecture of your life for the next 30 years. And third, what the ruling actually says, what Saturn has decided about the structures in your life that are built on truth and the ones that are not, and why the difference between those 2 categories is about to become impossible to ignore. The clock is already running. Saturn does not wait for you to feel ready. The verdict has been delivered. What you do with it is the only question that remains. Let me begin with what a Saturn verdict actually is, because most people understand Saturn as the planet of limitation, of delay, of the cosmic force that slows things down and makes life feel heavy. And that understanding is not wrong, but it is incomplete. Saturn is not a punisher. Saturn is an architect. And before any great architect approves a structure, they conduct an inspection. They run their hand along every wall. They test the load-bearing capacity. They check the foundation against the blueprint, and then they deliver their verdict, not in anger, not with malice, with the cold, precise authority of someone who has been doing structural assessments for 30 years and knows exactly what holds and what does not. The verdict Saturn is delivering right now in Aries is the result of an inspection that began in late February when Saturn entered this sign after nearly 3 decades away. Since then, quietly, methodically, with the unhurried thoroughness of a planet that takes 29.5 years to complete a single orbit, Saturn has been moving through every room of your life, running its hand along the walls of your relationships, pressing on the foundation of your career, checking the structural integrity of the beliefs you have built your identity on, and asking, about each one, the only question Saturn knows how to ask. Is this built on truth? Or is this built on what you needed to be true? Because those are not the same thing. And Saturn in Aries is the most uncompromising version of this question that exists in the entire zodiac. Aries is the sign of pure beginning, of the self at its most elemental, of identity before it has learned to perform itself for other people. When Saturn moves through Aries, it strips away every layer of identity that was acquired rather than earned, every structure that was built for appearance rather than function, every relationship that exists more for the story it tells about you than for the actual sustenance it provides. This is not comfortable. It was not comfortable in 1996 when Saturn last did this. It is not comfortable now, but it is not cruel. An architect who tells you the wall you are leaning against is not load-bearing is not being cruel. They are saving you from a collapse you would not survive. Now let me tell you what is different about this particular verdict compared to any ordinary Saturn transit. Because this is not ordinary. The Saturn in Aries cycle that is occurring right now is the first one to occur at 0° Aries, the very first degree of the entire zodiac, in approximately 9,000 years. Saturn conjuncted Neptune at that degree just weeks ago, and that conjunction, which happened only once in recorded human memory at this precise point, cracked open something that had been sealed for a generation. When Saturn and Neptune met at 0° Aries, the boundary between what is real and what is dreamed, between what has been built and what has only been imagined, between the structure your life actually has and the structure you have been telling yourself it has, that boundary became briefly transparent. You could see through it for the first time, and what you saw on the other side was not always what you expected. This is what prepared the ground for the verdict. The conjunction showed you the gap between the building and the blueprint. Saturn's verdict now names what fills that gap. It names what in your life belongs on the side of what is real and what belongs on the side of what was only ever imagined. And the verdict is specific. It is not a general commentary on the state of your life. Saturn in Aries does not do general. It does targeted, structural, and permanent. The verdict lands in 4 specific areas that Aries governs at its most elemental level. The first area is identity, who you have been telling yourself in the world that you are, not your deep nature. That is not in question. What is in question is the costume you have been wearing over your deep nature, the version of yourself you constructed to be acceptable, to be successful, to be worthy of love according to a definition of worthiness that was handed to you before you were old enough to evaluate it. Saturn's verdict about identity in Aries is the most direct verdict it delivers. It has no patience for performed selfhood. It finds the gap between who you are performing and who you actually are, and it widens that gap until the performance becomes physically unsustainable. If you have noticed in recent weeks that the version of yourself you present publicly has begun to feel like a costume that no longer fits, this is Saturn's finding on the identity question. The verdict is the costume must come off, not because you are inadequate without it, because you are more than it. And the next 30 years cannot be built by someone in a costume. The second area is the structures you maintain rather than inhabit. This distinction is crucial, and Saturn in Aries makes it impossible to avoid. There are structures in your life, relationships, professional roles, living situations, habits, ways of being in the world that you inhabit. They fit you. You move naturally within them. Your energy flows rather than pools when you are inside them. And there are structures you maintain. You show up to them. You tend to them. You invest energy in keeping them standing, but you do not live inside them. They exist more as evidence of something you once believed, a relationship that mattered deeply 5 years ago, a career path that made sense when you were a different person, a version of your daily life that was built for a self that has since changed, than as actual habitations of the person you are now. Saturn in Aries cannot maintain the maintained structures. Aries does not have the patience for maintenance that has replaced meaning, and the verdict Saturn is delivering is that the structures you are maintaining rather than inhabiting are consuming the resources, the time, the energy, the creative force that belong to the structures you have not yet built. You cannot build what comes next while using every available resource to maintain what you have already outgrown. The third area is the conversation that has not happened. Saturn in Aries governs direct speech. Aries is the sign that says the thing before the social calculation about whether it should be said has finished running. When Saturn moves through this sign, it applies pressure to every truth that has been waiting in the throat for the right moment. And the verdict it delivers in this area is simple. There is no right moment. There is only this moment or the next 30 years of that truth still sitting in your throat, collecting more weight with every passing month. The conversation that has not happened is not always the dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it is the quiet acknowledgement, the admission to yourself in the mirror that something has not been working for longer than you have been willing to name. The sentence spoken aloud to another person that names what both of you have been carefully not naming. The declaration of a direction that you have been too uncertain about to make public, because making it public makes it real, and real means it can be evaluated, and evaluation means it can be found inadequate, and the risk of that finding has seemed more dangerous than the cost of the silence. Saturn's verdict on the unspoken conversation is this: the cost of the silence has exceeded the cost of the evaluation. Speak. The fourth area is the foundation beneath the foundation. This is the deepest structural level that Saturn assesses in Aries, and it is the one most people do not reach in ordinary life. The foundation beneath the foundation is the set of beliefs you hold about what you deserve, what you are allowed to have, what is possible for someone like you, what the upper limit of your life should look like. These beliefs were formed early, most of them before you had the cognitive capacity to evaluate their accuracy, and they have been operating as load-bearing structures ever since. Most of the decisions you have made in your adult life, most of the structures you have built, most of the self-imposed limitations you have accepted as facts about reality rather than beliefs about yourself, have been built on top of this invisible foundation. Saturn in Aries does not accept invisible foundations. It brings everything to the surface, and the verdict it delivers about the beliefs you hold about your own worth and what you are allowed to have is the most consequential verdict in this entire reading. Because a building can only rise as high as its foundation allows, and if the foundation was laid by a child who was told, in one way or another, that the ceiling was lower than it actually is, then every structure built on that foundation has been artificially limited, not by reality, by a belief about reality that has never been tested against the actual structure of what is possible. This is what Saturn in Aries has come to inspect. This is the verdict it is delivering, and this is why nothing is the same after this transit as it was before. Now let me tell you what the ruling actually says, because understanding what is being inspected is one thing. Understanding what to do with the verdict is what changes a life. The ruling has two parts. The first part names what must be released. The second part names what must be built. What must be released is everything that falls on the maintained rather than inhabited side of the assessment, the costume version of yourself that you have been presenting in place of your actual nature, the conversations you have been not having, the structures that exist to maintain a story rather than to actually serve the life you are living, the beliefs about your own ceiling that were never your own in the first place. This release is not an invitation to chaos. It is not permission to burn your life down. Saturn in Aries does not demolish without purpose. It releases the load-bearing structures that were never actually bearing the right load, so that the energy they were consuming can be redirected toward building what actually holds. What must be built is the version of your life that does not require maintenance to stand. The structures that fit the person you actually are, rather than the person you constructed to be. The relationships that exist because they are genuinely nourishing rather than because they are proof of something. The professional expression that uses your actual capacity rather than staying carefully within the range you taught yourself was acceptable. The building that Saturn is authorizing in Aries is not a small renovation. It is not a fresh coat of paint on the same walls. The verdict Saturn has delivered, which has not been heard since 1996, is authorization for a structural rebuild. Not because your life is wrong, because you have been living in a building designed for a smaller version of yourself, and the building you actually need has been waiting for this verdict to begin. There is a practice for receiving a Saturn verdict, and it is not comfortable, but it is precise. In the next 3 days, before this transit window moves forward, find a quiet hour, not a stolen 5 minutes, a full hour. Sit down with a piece of paper, real paper, and draw a line down the center. On the left side, write what I am maintaining. On the right side, write what I actually inhabit. Do not think carefully about this. Do not craft your answers. Write quickly, and do not stop until the page is full. The answers that come quickly are the honest ones. The ones you stop to consider are the ones you are still negotiating with. When the page is full, look at the left column. Every item there is something Saturn's verdict has already addressed. It is not asking you to abandon it violently. It is asking you to stop pretending it is something you inhabit when you both know the truth. Then look at the right column. Everything there is the structural reality of who you actually are. And the question Saturn is asking, with the full authority of a 29-year cycle that began at the most significant degree in the zodiac, is this: when will you build something worthy of this column? The answer that Saturn accepts is only one word: now. You did not find this message by accident. Something in you recognized the frequency of this verdict before your conscious mind had language for it. The strange sense in recent weeks that the ground had shifted, that the rules had changed, that what used to work has quietly stopped working, that some part of your life that you have been carefully maintaining is taking more energy than it is returning, that a conversation you have been avoiding is getting louder even in its silence. Your body knew this verdict was coming before the transit was exact. Your body has been registering the structural assessment since Saturn entered Aries. The pressure in the chest, the disrupted sleep, the sudden inability to pretend that certain things are fine when they are not. These were not symptoms of stress. They were signals of structural review. The verdict has been delivered. Saturn has spoken with the authority of 30 years of silence, and the ruling is not a punishment. It is the most generous thing an architect can offer, a clear assessment of what holds and what does not, before you spend another 30 years building on a foundation that was never designed for the life you are actually capable of living. Nothing is the same after this verdict, but nothing was truly the same before it either. You have simply been given the language for what was already shifting beneath you. The verdict stands. What you build on it is yours to decide. If what you just heard named something real in your life, write it in the comments. Not the version that sounds acceptable, the actual thing that Saturn's assessment landed on. Your naming it here is the beginning of the build. And if someone in your life is living inside a structure that has been maintained long past its actual life, send them this. The verdict has been delivered. They deserve to hear it. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because what I will share next about what Saturn in Aries builds after the verdict will change how you understand the rest of this year. Every video takes hours of research and preparation. Your like, your comment, your share is what keeps this work alive. The universe has spoken. What comes next is in your hands.